Professor Ron, if you were to advise an actor who is slated to play a police officer that will be entering a fresh crime scene, what are some essentials that actor should know? Some details that really people only in law enforcement or forensics would know about?
Well, the first rule of a first responder, which is what we call the first officer on duty, is preservation of life. They have to go in and make sure if there's any bodies, are they alive? And if they are, the crime scene be damned, you have to do what you can to preserve their life. Get the EMTs in, get the paramedics, stuff like that. Unfortunately, it sometimes comes at the detriment of the crime scene, of the preservation of the crime scene. That said, once you've taken care of that, then you can preserve the crime scene. And by that I mean put up a perimeter, set up the yellow tape, make sure nobody comes in and out, make sure the press stays way, way far away. You don't want to allow people in that don't belong there. And one of the rules that we have is kind of like Boy Scouts, pack it in, pack it out. You walk in and try as the best you can to walk backwards the same way you came in. People don't understand that and don't get that because walking backwards in front of a camera is not a good thing. But that's what we actually do with a first responder. The second thing I have to say is study your role intently. Ian McKellen, who I met when I was just a kid, had told me that read your material in depth before you start anything. Because I had asked him about a Shakespearean play, and he says, I never read the play, I just do the scene. But you need to read everything, you're young. So to the neophyte, or the young officer in training, I would say read books, read websites. You don't have time to read books. Read journal articles, read websites, look things up. Expose yourself, if there's going to be dead bodies, expose yourself to pictures of dead bodies. There's plenty of websites out there that have things like that. That's basically what I would say.
In terms of an emotional response, would most officers just keep their composure in terms of, like, what if they see something involving children or just something that's very disturbing? Would most officers probably they'd still have to remain non-emotional?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You have to keep your emotions in check, would be a good way to say it. You have to maintain integrity of the scene and yourself at all times. Media has ways of finding out what's going on at a crime scene. They have microphones that can pick things up at 3 miles, whatever. They have their ways of finding out. I know of an incident that happened years ago where people were eating donuts and laughing, the command post, and they were setting things up and trying to get it going, and the media picked up on it, and that department got lambasted. That's not something that's appropriate. You have to stay with dignity and respect. One thing I always teach my students is when referring to a person that has passed away, they are decedents. They are not corpses. They are not dead guys. They are not bodies. They are decedents. That is the best way to pay respect. Yeah.
And is there a gender-specific terminology, or no? It's always decedent, and if we don't know who the person is it a Jane Doe, or that's...
Jane Doe, John Doe is very, very prevalent.
Right.
So Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, Jane Doe 3. Sometimes coroner's offices will label them Jane Doe and the date, things like that. So yes, we would still call gender non-specific and call them decedents. But yes, we would call them officially in a report until they've been identified, of course.
Sure.
Then you would label them by their name, and generally you would say, Mr. Roberts or whatever. You don't leak names out into the press usually until something's been really adjudicated, which means it's gone through all the way through court and through trial. Sometimes you don't release information like that. You preserve the integrity of the decedent.
In terms of approaching the decedent, let's suppose the officer realizes, okay, we have someone that has passed away. Mm-hmm. How are they approaching the body? They have gloves on?
Yes, hazmat would be involved. You have to be very, very careful when approaching a decedent, because you don't know if they have AIDS or if they have other communicable diseases, STDs, things like that. So wearing gloves, wearing proper hazmat materials. They have disposable materials from footies to the head. Everything in between, and they're like $5. It's no big deal. They're disposable. It is better to be protected, because you never, in this day and age, you never know with hepatitis C and other communicable diseases like that are highly contagious or are highly easily spread. You have to protect yourself.
So then, let's suppose they were protected. They had gloves, maybe some footies or whatever. How would they touch the decedent? Let's suppose they wanted to move him, or maybe they wouldn't move him. What would happen? Would that only be the EMTs or the coroner's office that would move the decedent?
Very good question. The coroner's office. Actually, there's a coroner/ME's office, which is medical examiner. The coroner is many times the sheriff coroner. The Orange County coroner is the Orange County sheriff in south of Los Angeles. But the medical examiner is the squad that takes care of examining the body. And they will be the ones that come in and move it, and I don't want to say it, move them, and take care of the examination. And you are allowed to protect and preserve, but you are not allowed to remove or move. You can pat them down and look for a wallet for identification, stuff like that. Be very, very careful. They may have a needle in their pocket. And even if you're wearing gloves, doesn't matter. Needles are sharper than any glove you're wearing, unless you're wearing, industrial strength. But the ME is the one that they will yell at you if you've touched the body and moved it, because, and as I teach in my courses, you can see if a body has been moved or hasn't been moved, and it's very important. I mean, a 5-minute of rolling it over could change could be the difference between knowing that it was laying down or not knowing if it was laying down or on its side or whatnot, and that can change the outcome of the investigation.
So when this officer is going to this crime scene, where are they checking for the pulse to see if they have a decedent, to see if it is a crime scene?
Yeah, well, that's two things. The best thing is the wrist, of course, or the carotid artery, which I forget which side that's on. I don't do that part. And then as to if it's a crime scene or not, always just, I don't want to say pretend, always assume that it's a crime scene until proven otherwise. That is the best formula for an investigation. You can always, also another thing with the perimeter that I talked about with the yellow tape and all that, you can always push it out further, because you can always pull back when you need to. So you may start off with having a perimeter that's 5 blocks wide, because you don't know where the killer may still be in the neighborhood, assuming there's a killer, of course. But as you find out, no, it's just located at the house, then you can pull things in. Or a lot of times, we're under a time constraint. If you're on a freeway, say a freeway shooting happened, you close down the freeway, people are going to get ticked off. You don't want it closed any longer than you have to. You have to get in, get it done right, and get out. You have one chance. That's one of the most important rules of any scientific investigation, is you have one chance to preserve it, to document it, to collect it. And particularly when it comes to like a freeway, you cannot go back the next day. Your crime scene has been compromised at that point. Same thing with a house, not too bad, you can lock down. You can say nobody can get in here, it's preserved. In lighting terms, it's a hot set. Things like that. You can leave it as it is.
Professor Ron, can we talk about someone approaching a crime scene and collecting fingerprint evidence? Who would that person be, and how would they approach this evidence?
The person that it would be is what we term a criminalist. They are the ones they study criminalistics. They are the evidence collection team. Everything that is collected, not just fingerprints, but swabbing for blood, semen, saliva, perfumes. We can do scents too. These are done by criminalists. Let me explain it quickly, if I may. There's 3 types of forensic scientists, if you will. There is the front line, which are the criminalists. They go out and collect and preserve everything. Then there's the laboratory criminalist that runs the assays and runs everything through the equipment, through the gas spectrometer and through microscopes, all that stuff. That's the lab technician. The third level is the scholar practitioner that writes the algorithms, if you will, for that the laboratory people would use to say Armstrong 2013 states that this person is 5'6" to 5'9" because ... I myself am a forensic practitioner. I do research and I teach, and I hope to create out of my research an algorithm one day. But to answer your question specifically, it is a criminalist that does all of the work, and they are certified. It is not an easy topic to do, to roll prints, because there's rolling live prints, rolling prints off of a decedent, rolling prints off of a decedent that's been in water. There are all sorts of techniques and ways of rolling a print, and that's just collecting prints from a hand. Then there's also finding a print, which we call a latent print. Latent means hidden, basically. So there's finding the prints and developing them, brushing things with the powder and the brush and all that stuff. There's so much to just a fingerprint or a thumbprint or an ear print or a footprint. We have ridges and valleys all over the place, and we have oil all over the place and proteins, and you can get things off of this. And because this is for writers, I'll give you a trick. A bloody fingerprint. Do you do the blood, or do you develop the print? Blood gives you DNA, and other, did they have STDs and stuff like that? And now with a human genome mapping, God knows what else they can find out from it, depending on how big the sample is. Whereas working with a fingerprint gets you into APHIS, and the fingerprint database is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But so is the DNA database. What do you do? I'll let you decide.
So does that mean if someone went to, let's say, live scan, like they were a teacher or a notary, their fingerprints would still be in this database?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm in there many times.
Right.
Many, 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 many times.
And so if whoever this person was that was at that step, they would be able to access sort of this big brother of fingerprints?
Well, you have to be in law enforcement to get into code. APHIS, sorry, Automated Forensic Indexing, I forget the S. So, but it's run by the FBI.
So what if somebody did a DIY fingerprints with Scotch tape? Does that work?
Yeah.
Have you ever? Okay, so that's something that
God,
could
yeah,
write
please.
into
My
a
kids
script?
do it. I go, here, go like this, and they're like, because that's getting the. I always say when kneading a print, run your fingers through your hair, because then you get the protein and the sweat and all that stuff on there, and then stick it. You get a much better print. It develops better for you, if you will, and the glue acts as a, what's the word I'm looking for? Acts as a developer, so that not the glue, but the stickiness of the tape would act the adhesive. That's the word I'm looking for. Would act as a developer. So if you do the sticky thing, you're going to find a really good print. But getting that dusted and into a database, many, 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 many steps.
So what would a MacGyver of fingerprints do? What are some DIY tips if we were going to show that in a script or an actor was going to play that? Besides the Scotch tape, what are some other little homemade things they can do?
Super glue fuming. They did it in Beverly Hills Cop 2, for those of you that remember that, where generally you have a tank because you need the fumes, a super glue fuming. You have a heating element. I use a coffee mug soup heater, and I put stuff into a little metal, what would I call it, a cupcake holder. Try to get aluminum if you can. Smart and final. Pour a few drops in. Place your suspect evidence close to it. Turn on the heater, cover it. It could be a terrarium, It could be, I'm just using a plastic box at home. It was a $3.96 at Walmart. It's no big deal. It's about yay big, just so it is a chamber, if you will. Turn the heat on and then let the fumes do their thing. It takes 5-10 minutes, unlike in the movies where it takes 30 seconds. But the process will, the super glue, for whatever reason, adheres to the proteins in the fingerprint. And you can do it on a Coca-Cola bottle, on tin cans, and pretty much anything that's non-porous. I say non-porous because if it has holes in it, you're going to have gaps in your prints. So that's one thing, and that's the biggest one, is super glue fuming. I do that in my workshops. Let's see, what else would I have? Footprints. You can develop footprints. We have, in forensics, we have knowns and unknowns, and we can compare those things. We're always looking for patterns. That's what we do in forensics. Everything is patterns. Does this pattern match this pattern? Does this fingerprint match this fingerprint that I have on paper? If it does, you've got a match, and you can go, okay, this is John Doe. Look for him in the rogues gallery, find out where he is, locate him, book him, Dano, all that fun stuff. But with the footprints, we can look at the wear and tear on the shoes. Did they walk on their sole? Did they walk on their arch? That doesn't help you with with finding the person, but it sure helps with a victimology or with a criminal profiling, particularly for novels and things like that. Oh, he had a limp and stuff like that. That bushy-haired man with the limp from The Fugitive. But you can actually compare. You can tell this is Nike, this is Adidas, because they have very distinct treads on the bottom of the shoes. So that's something you can do at home. Just take it, if you want, grab an ink blotter and just go on the shoe and put it on the linoleum or even a piece of paper. It's enough to get the idea of how you can play with this. And this is something I would even tell actors, that we had mentioned in a previous segment. I would tell actors, play with this stuff. This is how you learn, how you understand things, rather than just going, okay, I read a script and they say do this, do this. This is how you truly understand and take it to heart.
So going back to that theoretical, set with the young police officer, actor, they won't be the ones actually collecting the prints. They would secure the crime scene, they would wait, and then they would wait for this criminologist to come?
Criminalist.
Criminalist, I'm sorry.
Criminologist would be somebody who studies crime.
Okay, sorry. So criminalist
Yes.
would come and they would do the dusting, and
Yes.
they would, okay, great. They would not, the police officer would not do it themselves.
Well, as you set it up as a first responder, yes, their job is to maintain integrity of the scene. The ME would take care of the body, and the criminalist would take care of the rest of it. Criminalists aren't even allowed to touch the ME and get fingerprints. I mean, allowed to touch the body. They have to wait for the ME before they can get prints off of the decedent as well. ME has massive reign. They have their own investigative squads too. The ME's office. If you read Patricia Cornwell novels, she talks very much about having a team and going out and doing stuff like that.
Professor Ron, in recent years, there's been these horrific stories about, captives, people that have been stowed away in someone's home for years. From a screenwriting aspect, what would you have this writer do if some type of law enforcement is approaching a situation like that? They've discovered maybe a tip from a neighbor, and it turns out there's been a few people living in the basement, something to that nature, something really horrific.
Yeah. From my colleagues in law enforcement, that I understand is, first off, backup. Do not go in by yourself. Do not go in with just you and your partner. Make sure you have, not necessarily SWAT, but depending on how hostile the person is, you want to approach the door with not trepidation, but you want to be careful. You don't want to tip them off. You maybe pretend that you're the diaper man. Well, that's an old one, but you got to get them to the door, is what I'm trying to get at. You have to get them to answer the door, because these are recluse people, recluse and reckless. It's not something that you want. Lives are on the line here, so you have to be very cautious and you have to be very meticulous in your thinking. Try to always know the answers before you even ask a question, type of thing, where you will anticipate, okay, scenarios. That's what cops do. You'll know if it's this scenario, we'll do this. If it's this scenario, we'll do that. If it's this or that, I mean, you'll have as much recon as you can about, anybody know where are the rooms in the house, where are the escape routes, stuff like that. You have people in the backyard, you have people in the front yard. Typical cop stuff that you see on literally cops that show all the time. But you want to do it carefully so that you don't impede on or the possibility or create the possibility of escalated violence.
In some of these cases, it seems like there was a woman harboring a husband, boyfriend, who it seemed like everything was fine from the outside, and then you find out that this person was an accomplice by allowing that person to get away with it. So if there was, let's say, the sweet doting wife at the door, how would you have the officer approach that? I've heard a lot of cases like this, and
yeah.
you're just shocked to find out that.
Generally, from my understanding, and this is maybe more from the news than from conversations, is you give them tells. You kind of hint at things and let them respond with their eyes, or you're reading their body language to know, because generally with a female, it's not the female that is the perpetrator. It is the male unit.
But they're still an accomplice because they've been.
Well, are they? Are they an accomplice, or are they a victim as well? That's the biggest thing that I would interject, particularly as a writer. I would think that they would most likely be a victim that's been beaten down, trodden as well, and not that they're going to show scars on their face. They may have burn marks on their arms, but don't touch the face, as they say. I mean, it's easier if you find a beaten up woman to go, okay, domestic violence, let me in now. I'm a cop. If it's something that's a little more covert, a little more, I don't want to say occult, but hidden, you have to, as with anything, you have to tread lightly and ask probing questions that might get them out. Maybe say, can you step out on the porch, please? I like the idea as a writer of maybe a traveling book salesman, if they even have them anymore. Do they have them anymore? I don't know. But something that can you come out and see this? Now, actually, I'm going to twist this. I believe it was Ted Bundy would use a little dog and say, "Can you help me find my little dog?" Maybe you can use the same philosophy of, "Can you come out and help me, do something?" Maybe it's find my little dog. But this is law enforcement speaking, so that you understand what's going on, and then be able to question them away from the person. Because as soon as she steps away, you're going to draw out. The person is going to go, "What the F? What's going on? Why are you here? What are you doing?" And then you can cuff them. If you're going to be that bold. Writer's choice.
Professor Ron, from a screenwriting perspective, does the writer gain more authenticity writing about the situation from the criminal's perspective or law enforcement's perspective?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to reach into my favorite book, Thomas Harris, Red Dragon, where he writes a scene, everything's going third person, first person, whatever, he's going along with it, and then he switches a scene out of nowhere that is written from, and she's holding the gun and shooting it, and is completely written from, it's about the character that you've been following, but he switches the point of view. That's a writer's job, is to make us look at things differently. That's one thing I try to do with when I teach forensics too. Is one of my favorite scenes is not a crime movie, is Dead Poets Society, where he has everybody stand up on the desk and look out and get just a completely different view of the classroom. Here, we're in a classroom. So change your point of view, play with it. What works best for you? You may want to write your entire book from the point of view of the criminal, but you still have to have your resolution and your denouement and all that fun stuff at the end. But that's something that the writer has to choose. And I wouldn't dictate what to say, but I would just advise, play with point of view. It's very, 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 very powerful.
So the point of view of a criminal, how would that be shown differently? It would just be within the actions, within the mind? I mean, it just seems like both are going to be very methodical. Well, criminals are very smart. They're usually very intuitive, you know, and there's a fine line sometimes between both sides.
Yes.
Anyway, we won't go into that topic, but would they still be very meticulous in their actions, or would they be more sloppy, and that's why some are caught?
Oh, my favorite topic. Organized versus disorganized offenders. We have a word for it, or a name, a phrase. Organized would be Ted Bundy. Very easily, just to give you a real example.
Very bright man.
Very bright man. He actually took his own, not his own life. He took his own life, his control of his own courtroom.
Yeah.
He defended himself. Right before he sentenced him, the judge looked him straight in the eye and said, "Sir, I would love to have you practice in my courtroom." And then something along the lines of, "However, you're a sick, disgusting man and you're going to die." It was a very powerful moment, very powerful. But back to, he's an organized offender. Things were very neat. His crime scenes were very clean. There's very little evidence. Many times his crime scene was different than his dump site. The crime scene being where, well, the murder actually happened would be the crime scene, or the scene of the crime. Whereas a dump site would be where you find the body. In Silence of the Lambs, they were finding them in rivers and lakes and things like that. So that was not the crime scene. He didn't kill them in the river. He killed them elsewhere, and as we find out later, he kills them, spoiler alert, he kills them in his basement and then disposes of the bodies. Interesting thing, the reason I love that book so much, and it is my favorite book, is Red Dragon. Silence of the Lambs is good too. But he amalgamates Ted Bundy, Theodore Kaczynski, which is the Unabomber, maybe not him. He amalgamates about 4 or 5 traits of serial killers. Ed Gein with the skin, which Texas Chainsaw Massacre was taken from, taken way out of proportion, of course.
Zodiac Killer?
Zodiac Killer, yeah, which may have been Theodore Kaczynski, actually. So, if you don't know this is just a tidbit. The manifesto of the Zodiac Killer, the very last segment, they could not decipher. But if you put in Theodore Kaczynski, it finished it exactly.
Wow, did not know that.
Yes, I study weird things.
Yeah.
Which is why we're here.
Can you give us an example of a disorganized offender, Professor Ron?
Yes, probably several. Andrew Cunanan, who ultimately ended up killing Gianni Versace, hard to say. He was actually a spree killer. He was not a serial killer. A serial killer will kill and have time off in between kills. A few weeks, a month, several months, several years, like Andrew Ridgway, the Green River serial killer. Pardon me if I get the name wrong. Those are serial killers. Andrew Cunanan was a spree killer. He had no cooling off period. He went from site to site to site killing people. He was from San Diego and Gianni Versace was in Florida, and he killed like 10 people in between. He just kept going and going and going. Now, it may have taken him 2 or 3 days to change locations, but he never stopped.
So why was he disorganized? What were some of the things that he left messy that ultimately got
the crime scenes, his suicide, everything about him was disorganized. He was maybe a thrill seeker. I mean, I don't know much about himself, but other than what I saw in the news as it happened. Switch to Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He was messy. He would go in and murder and cut up and maim. I heard he took out eyeballs, put in occult symbols all over the place. Not that he was necessarily into that stuff or not, but they didn't try him for that. They tried him for murder, and he died in prison at 52, I believe. So I just found that out recently.
Yeah.
But the point being that he was disorganized in that he didn't care where he made his mess, who he made his mess with, cleaning up his mess, crossing his tracks. We knew where he came from. We knew how he got in. We knew how he got out. Access and egress is the words we would use. Access getting in, egress getting out. He was just a mess. Who else can I think of? Kenneth Bianchi and Andrew, I can't remember, the Hillside Stranglers. They were cousins. They were not, again, dump sites. They would kill them and then dump them on the sides of the road. I think it was the 2 or the 134 or something like that, somewhere here in Southern California. They just dumped them, just dumped their bodies. They didn't care. We found traces of carpet fibers, which is one of the things that led to their downfall, if you will, because we were able to, as we said earlier, match the carpet fibers to fibers in their trunk and stuff like that, hair, things like that. Trace evidence is what we call it. So I consider anybody that leaves anything, not anything behind, but preponderance of stuff behind. We have one of the first principles of criminalistics is Locard's theory of transference. What you bring in, you will leave a little of you, and you will bring a little of what you have back. We will have this carpet fiber on our feet when we walk out. It will have stuff from our shoes and our skin cells that have shed, hair follicles. We will be in this room. Not necessarily forever. Hopefully they clean eventually. Just kidding. But there's Locard's theory is the founding principle of criminalistics, is that there's always a transference. There's always an exchange. So you look for that exchange, and then you look for the matches.
If someone was to write the perfect crime, what would mess up the forensics person?
Nothing. I always say, that's the number one question I get is what do you do? And I say lie and lie. First you get a big cast iron tub, you put a body in it, and you pour lye over it until it's dissolved. Bodies will dissolve, bone and all. And then if somebody says, have you seen Fred? You go, no, haven't. You lie. So lie and lie. However, when the criminalists get there and they examine the pipes and they go, why is there so much lye in the pipes? They're going to get onto you. There's no perfect crime. No perfect crime. We will find a way. It may take time, but we will find a way. And as writers, we will find it in interesting ways.
Is it easier to write a script from a disorganized criminal's point of view versus an organized?
Depends on the way you think in your audience. I personally think it would be more fun to write a disorganized because I like evidence and red herrings, and you can do anything with disorganized. Oh, I found this, like I said earlier, a bloody fingerprint. What do you do with that? You can play with that stuff, but red herrings are going, well, it could be this, it could be that. And you get more of that, which makes, I think, a better read. This is for novels, of course. It makes a better read if you've got something disorganized because you can go anywhere with it and you don't know where you're going with it. Organized, pretty linear. Pretty linear. So it depends on what you're shooting for.
Professor Ron, what would a forensic photographer do upon entering a crime scene?
Document everything. This is one of my favorite topics. First off, and I'm going to have to look at you for this, when you have a camera, you see on TV they hold it straight ahead. We don't do that in forensics. We hold the light off to the side so it bounces this way. Angle of incidence equals angle of reflection. I'll get out of your face now. That's one of the things that gets me. I understand it's if a flashbulb lights off, it's going to bounce. Holding something sideways is not pointing towards the camera. I get that. But in real forensics, we bounce sideways. Otherwise, the light will just bounce straight back. Angle of incidence equals angle of reflection, really, but refraction. Something else that I would say about forensic photographers that I was trained as is shoot everything twice, 3 times if you can. And now with digital, you can. If you remember, cameras carrying 35 pictures. If you're going to film 10 rolls, then shoot 15. You only get one chance. You only have a limited amount of time to capture everything. And a good example, the OJ trial. There was a image that the cameraman captured, or the photographer captured, in the bathroom. There were at the day of the actual crime, or the crime scene analysis, there were boxes of Swiss Army knives that were like 6 inches long or something like that. They never saw those boxes nor found those knives. They only have the pictures to go on. So they couldn't move any further. But in the investigation, it came up. They didn't go anywhere with it in court. I mean, they tried, but they couldn't go anywhere because all they had was the image. Had he found, oh, there's boxes of image stuff, you have to look. You can't just take pictures and go, oh, great, 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 great. What are you shooting? What are you taking images of? So you have to look at your surroundings. You're cataloging the entire thing. Now, I don't mean take a picture and write it down. We have, what's what I'm looking for, scales that we would put down so that you can know, okay, here's a ruler so you can know that this gun casing was 3 inches long as compared to one that's 1.5 inches or something like that. So we have scales, and you put them down, you take your picture, you pick it up, you go somewhere else. Let's see, what else would I do as a photographer? So document everything. And
you're not touching anything, right?
No.
Because that's the medical examiner.
No, the medical examiner is for the body.
The body, okay.
The decedent.
The
sorry.
decedent, excuse me, okay.
Yes.
So, but then this forensic photographer is not touching anything, not moving anything. It's capturing the images as they are at this.
Well, it's a conundrum, which could come in handy in writing. If you find stuff before the ME gets there, the medical examiner, take your pictures, document everything. Then go through the house or the crime scene again after the ME has removed the body and take pictures, because you may have to lift something up. There may be an inscription or something. There may be blood. There may be a bullet. There may be something hidden. Maybe it was an organized offender and they have an MO and they're leaving their calling card, and you don't find it because you didn't move things. So yes, you do want to move things, but not before the ME moves the body. That's only if there's a body. There's plenty of crimes, assault, not assault, that's humans, burglary, breaking and entry, home invasion robberies, all sorts of stuff where there are no people involved. And there's plenty of crime. Breaking into a jewelry store. I remember one in Beverly Hills. I was trying to get down Wilshire. They just my friend ended up documenting everything. And they were there all night documenting all the jewelry, because if they were missing a piece, the photographs would reveal that.
So what are some of the things that a forensic photographer is taking pictures of? Doorknobs, forced entry?
Yes. We look at potential prints. I mean, we talked about fingerprints earlier. They can take pictures of the prints too. You don't have to just lift them and get rid of them. You can also take pictures of, particularly if you use the fluorescent techniques. We'll use lighting. Luminol. I don't know if you're familiar with luminol, but blood that has been washed away, so you think, can be developed because of the proteins left behind in the say it's in the wall. If there was blood spatter on the wall and people washed it down, peroxide gets blood out very nicely, but it leaves the fatty deposits behind. So you may have washed it down, but you can use luminol to redevelop the walls. Take pictures of it, because luminol will degrade over time and disappear, of course, because it makes everything luminesce. We use various. Oh, okay. Here's a good one. We use various colors and UV lights, alternating light systems, to develop different pictures and be able to see things. You can see handwritten articles on a piece of paper where they had written on a piece of paper above it, and the paper's gone now. Using a different light source and with the right colored lens, and you can also see them with goggles too, and the right light source. They have to be matched, if you will. 100 micrograms and 100 micrograms equals red, whatever. But you can see these things. You can photograph all of this stuff. They did that in, I can't remember if it was Red Dragon. Yeah, it was Red Dragon. Again, my favorite movie, sorry. But they have great forensics in that one. When they're examining the toilet paper from the crime scene, and he had blacked out, I should say, the address of Will Graham. They got everything squished down and then used alternating light source to make the pen that was underneath the blackout come to the top, if you will, and then take photographs of it. And then they had to put it back and get it back in Hannibal Lecter's cell. So I mean that's documented. So there's so many things that a good or even a bad forensic photographer can do. But the biggest thing is document everything. But we have tips and techniques to do things. I'll leave you with this one. Painting with light. My favorite technique. You leave your camera aperture open. Generally, do this with two people. You cover it and you say, okay, I'm gonna light it up now. They uncover it, and then you either shoot off your flash or your strobe, or you can take one of those big sunlights and literally paint with light. And because you're leaving the aperture open, and we're talking like pitch black stuff. You can get a picture of a house, which I've done. You can actually get a picture of a house by painting with light. It's a fantastic technique. I highly recommend that people look into that.
Professor Ron, who would come in and determine a decedent's age, their sex, their ethnicity, and their stature?
Me.
Okay. And that title is?
Forensic Anthropologist.
Okay.
That is what I specialized in. I have my master's and my bachelor's in physical anthropology. Age, sex, race, and stature. We say race, now we say ethnicity. God, how to break it down. The simplest way to do it is we have algorithms we take measurements. That's the easiest way. There's metric and non-metric ways of determining age, sex, race, and stature. I don't want to bore you with all the details of this, but there are a few people that you want to be involved with for a few reasons. Forensic anthropologists will tell you exactly what you asked. A forensic archaeologist will help you dig up the remains so that we can get to the lab, and the forensic anthropologist can do what we do. I'm a lab monkey. I did my work at UC Santa Cruz in the labs. That's where I got my feet wet, so to speak. Sometimes you'll also hear about forensic entomologists because we can tell time of death, which is another story entirely. And forensic entomologists will get involved. The three of them work very, very closely together. A medical examiner may have a forensic, or will probably have a forensic examiner, anthropologist on call, maybe even on their team. Bones, love Kathy Reichs. She's the best forensic anthropologist in the world right now. She wrote and created Bones based off of her books. We don't walk in and we're lucky if we have a corner, let alone, touch screens and an entire staff and all that stuff. I mean, maybe in Canada, but not here in the States. It's not funded that much. And to tell you the truth, we don't find skeletonized remains that often. We do find them, but it's more, we'll find in various stages of decomposition, which we will take into consideration as anthropologists. We are trained in anatomy and osteology, which is bones.
But from a screenwriting perspective, would all this determining of the age and ethnicity happen in the coroner's office? Where would this typical scenario take place?
We can actually do this in the very good question. We can actually do it anywhere. Is the broad answer. We can do it in the field. We have field measurement tapes. We have osteometric boards. We have, for stature, if you find a whole decedent as compared to fragments, we have, not yardsticks, but telescoping poles that can get some basic information in the field, so we can, because when you're trying to identify somebody, the first thing you need to know is how tall are they, what race are they, or ethnicity, are they white, are they black, are they Asian, are they mixed? We can tell some of these things by looking at the bones. Oh. We can tell some of these things by examining remains. Now, one thing that I always want to make clear in my classes, and I like to make clear here, is human remains are not what you see on TV. Human remains will start decomposing within a few hours, and within a day or two, unrecognizable as human beings sometimes, other than the fact that they're bipedal and there's a head on top. You don't see that on TV. They say, oh, this person's been dead 6 days, and they look like roses. They smell. The smell, the sickeningly sweet smell of human putrefaction, forensic anthropologies. So that's something for writers to take into consideration, is maybe a strong reaction. Maybe somebody throws up. Maybe they throw up 3 or 4 times. My professor and I always agreed, throw up and then get in there and do it if you have to. There is no myth buster here. There is no stuff to put under your nose like in, again, Silence of the Lambs. I did a decomposition study with a deer once, and I put Vicks on my nose. You can smell everything because Vicks clears your sinuses real good. You think the strong smell would overdo it? No, you end up smelling more. But that's a tip that a writer could possibly use, is trial and error.
I was a realtor for a while and walked into a house that was on a caravan, and all the agents became sick because it was a probate. And so I experienced that. And another time, like a coroner sticker was still on the door, and they had it listed. Things like that. What are some of the little signs that if someone was supposed to enter a property and the body had been removed, but things like that? The coroner sticker, would there still be tape? Would there be, biohazard on the door? Like, what are some of the little things?
Biohazard, booties all over the place, footprints all over the place. As bodies decompose, they will have purge fluid, which is, if you get them within a day or two, they decompose. They turn into liquid, basically. That liquid can stain the carpet. It can stay on the counter. If it's not, hazmat hasn't come in and cleaned it yet, or even if they had, particularly carpet, it'll go into the padding. So you'd have to replace all the carpeting, particularly if you want to sell a house. My parents were real estate agents. I feel for you. What else can we tell writers? So there's metric and non-metric variations. I wish I could show them to you right now, but non-metric is the fun ones. We have a rule of thumb. You ever had sciatica? Run from the back of your from your lower back, and then there's pain all the way down the back of your leg?
Not yet, hopefully.
Okay, that's called sciatica. It's a sciatic nerve. Mm-hmm. In the human pelvis, there's a sciatic notch, and we have something called a rule of thumb. If your thumb just kind of fits in there, it's a female. It's a male. And if you can move it around, it's a female. Because the female's pelvic girdle spreads, so the notch becomes wider. It's much more effective when I play with Fred back here in the side. But we call it the rule of thumb. So there's something that a writer can play with there. But there are non-metric variations that you can look up. I highly recommend starting at the University of Tennessee Knoxville's website for their anthropology. That's where the body farm, one of the body farms, but there are many of them, but that's where the body farms was started. But start with their anthropology department, and they have links, and you can find all sorts of stuff.
Professor Ron, what prompted your interest in forensic anthropology? Was it a TV show? Was it witnessing something at a museum?
What started it was very simple. I wanted to be an anthropologist because I love bones. It's that simple. I also cross-trained in zooarchaeology, which is animal remains, so faunal. I love bones. My license plate says into bones. So I went to school to study bones. When I got there, I met my professor, who I ended up being her research assistant and all that fun stuff. She was a forensic anthropologist, number 52 out of, I think there's like 60 something now only, of board certified. And she introduced me to the world of forensic anthropology. Okay, got it. Another caveat for you. Forensic means of the courts. It just means that we're doing things for the people, by the people, of the people type of thing. I was on the forensic squad in college, and that was the speech and debate team. So forensics, everybody goes, are you into forensics? Actually, what you're really saying is, are you into science? It's the forensic sciences that is actually what we're talking about here. Forensics is just the moniker, but that just means that you're going to court for it. There's forensic nurses that will talk about rape kits. There's forensic accountants that will talk about double books and stuff like that, because that's still illegal. If anything, if it's illegal or a criminal or even a civil act, it could be considered forensics. So I'll get off my high horse on that one.
Have there been cases of information, remains, blood samples, where it's not of human origin and it's not of an animal origin?
I don't know.
And we don't know what it is.
I don't know. I wish I knew, though, because I've done a lot of studies on Bigfoot and cryptids, which are Loch Ness Monster, chupacabras, it's things that scientists haven't seen yet, so it's considered not real, but other people will swear, no, it exists. I would love to find some samples of that, bones even, I mean, because I can look at bones and tell you a lot about them and say, okay, well, this is this type, or maybe it's a marsupial or a mucilid or stuff. But no, I personally haven't run across anything that's unexplainable yet. But I'm a scientist. I'm not a skeptical scientist. I'm a hopeful scientist.
What about light orbs? You know, they say decedent sometimes remains at a property in a light orb, and then this is the decedent's essence, spirit. You know, if we're all energy and matter and we don't really actually cease, there's parts of us remain. So how do you explain these light orbs? Or maybe that's not part of what you do, but if you were to write it into something, remains that things that are still in the atmosphere that you can't explain whether they're human, animal, but they're of some nature. There's of some substance there. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm probably not explaining myself.
No. It's a subject that I love, actually. I love paranormal and things like that. And I always say, I'm a scientist, so take this with a grain of salt. If something coalesces out of nowhere and goes and then disappears, it still came from somewhere. It still did something. I will not say that orbs don't exist because I've seen them in film. I'm not saying that they weren't made up, but why not? Why not? I've seen many dead bodies. I've only seen a handful of people pass away, mostly family members. I've never experienced that myself, but I had experiences as a child that had to do with lights and colors and things like that I can't explain. I do have a funny one, though. I finally figured it out, though. I sleep canatonically sometimes. I dream, and I incorporate what I see in my dreams, so I think I'm watching ghosts walking around the room. And then when I wake up, I find out that I had been asleep with my eyes open. I just found that out a few years ago because my wife had caught me. So there are scientific explanations for everything as far as I'm concerned. If there is no scientific explanation, we just don't know what the scientific explanation is yet.
So in a script, how would someone determine that it's a big question mark? Or is that in science, there always has to be some follow-up, or law enforcement, there has to be some result from an action?
Maybe I can answer it this way. There's no such thing as a truth. There's only such thing as a fact. And a fact is only a fact until we've unproven it and find something else. I forget, there's a name I'm sure for it after somebody from Galileo's time or something. But if we revolve around the sun. We all say we know that now, but there was years ago where they thought that the sun revolved around us. Things changed, and then they found a new fact. We may find another fact that turns out we revolve around something in the Milky Way, and the sun is just a secondary or tertiary thing. We're getting very off the topic and deep here, but I like this kind of stuff. So
Just wondering, yeah.
come up and ask me that.
In terms of findings that you could not determine what species, whether it was human, animal, it was the line was too blurred.
Oh, I can tell human versus animal. That part's
You
easy.
can, okay.
That part's easy. Animals, though, being a zooarchaeologist as well, because I consider myself a zooarchaeologist. Animals are a little harder to peg, but if you've got a good field guide, it's much easier to narrow it down to, this is a moose, or you can go by size too. I know what body parts they look like, what the phalanges look like, which is the finger bones, or the carpals or the tarsals, which are the leg bones and stuff like that. And they look completely different in different animals, and that's how we identify them. It's the pattern that we look at. So we can still identify things.
Professor Ron, how would someone show the tricking of a crime scene, the coming in with false evidence to confuse investigators?
That's an interesting take. It's only evidence until determined that this is not pertinent to the investigation. And one thing that we need to discuss that we haven't talked about yet is, as a criminalist, you collect and identify and preserve and all that stuff, but then you pass it on to the detectives. You don't go, let's see, I won't name names, but there's a certain show where they had police powers and they were doing crime scene investigations and they were collecting evidence, and yet they were telling the perps that you're busted because I found this, that, and the other. That's not real life. Criminalists collect. They don't carry guns. Maybe they do in some jurisdictions. I can't swear to that one. But they don't carry guns. They don't carry a badge. Well, maybe a badge to get on site that says crime scene investigator. But they don't have police powers, is the word I'm getting to. Even with the FBI and sheriffs and all that stuff, the criminalists will take and package their goods and pass it on, as I said, to the lab. And then the lab will do its research and probably kick out most of, this is pertinent or germane to our test, or not, or question mark, therefore preserve it anyway, if that makes sense. Right. So then they will pass that on to the investigator, and that's the one thing that we haven't talked about. We're talking about in forensic science a lot here, which is what I do, but it's the police that ultimately do everything. When I say police, I mean sheriff or CHP, or no derogatory towards anybody, just sure. Policing. Mm-hmm. So the detectives, the police officers, will do the actual investigation and hit the beat and do the backup information. If you find a fingerprint, they have to find the hand that matches it. They have to do that by going out into the field and interviewing people and talking to people and collecting fingerprints and matching them. But you have to have a warrant to do that. I mean, there's a whole milieu of police procedural, and there's great books on that by even the writer's store. There's one that's called Police Procedure, or Procedural, one of the two. I recommend anybody that wants to do any of this, though, to read a lot, particularly if you're a writer. If you're an actor, as we discussed before, you're going to do what the director and the script tell you. This comes down to writing. Read up as much as you can, as best as you can. There's plenty of websites, but of course, like Wikipedia, as we say in education, you can't cite Wikipedia. No offense. You can't cite Wikipedia because it's not peer-reviewed. So you want things that are by CRC Press, Taylor Francis, Elsevier. Those are some of the more known forensic books publishers. I would look into those. I would look into websites. Zeno's forensics page was fantastic. I don't know if it exists or not anymore, but that one lists everything, schools and places to learn stuff. Take classes. Don't be afraid to take a professional class. Go to the California Institute up in Sacramento and take a fingerprinting class. They have a whole degree program in it. Santa Ana College here in Los Angeles, or actually Orange County, has a policing program. Sometimes you can get into post-training, police officer standards training. So even if you can't get into them, maybe you can get their materials. Study.
How can someone tell the time of death? What type? Let's suppose it's a car fire, and investigators are coming out to an accident, and there's a decedent in the driver's seat. It's been on fire. The fire's been extinguished. How would they estimate the time of death?
Okay. There's some easy questions and then hopefully some good points that I can make out of this one. As I had mentioned earlier, time of death, there's a scale, a timeline of how the body decomposes and skeletonizes and mummifies and things like that, which we're not talking about here. Car fire time of death would be called perimortem. There's an antemortem period, which is when you're alive or before death. Perimortem period, which is around the time of death, and we would just say this person, died, perimortem from a car fire. And then, of course, there's antemortem, which is after death. Those come in actually more in play, if I can get off the car fire for a second. Those come more in play with, was this mark on the bone made antemortem, perimortem, or postmortem? Because we can tell, because the bone is green when it's fresh, whereas if it's dry, the marks will leave different striations, different types of marks. I'm an osteologist, I go back and forth. As to the barbecue, one of my favorite words, you would know within a half an hour. Well, I guess you could actually find somebody that died, you can find the car fire 3 days later if they were out in the Aurora woods. That would go into the timeline of death and decomposition that I've mentioned before. So that would play into it, and the charred remains would have to be taken into consideration. I don't know of any algorithms for considering that, but we would still go under the basic, rigor mortis, liver mortis, lividity. Trying to think of the process, the bloating, stuff like that, and we can still tell roughly how long it's been. The longer it's been, and this is good for writing, the longer it's been, the harder it is to tell. Whereas we can say, rigor mortis is set in, but rigor mortis also sets out. It sets in, it sets out. It starts 12, 14 hours in, but within a day or two, it releases and goes out. I may have my numbers a little skew, I apologize. But still, it starts and then it stops. So you can say if they're in rigor mortis, it's within this time period. And that would still work with a car fire. A car fire that just happened on the side of the 101 freeway, you're going to have a respondent immediately. So you'll probably have eyewitnesses that this happened almost instantaneously. You will not be able to, I don't know if this is part of the question, you will not be able to ascertain how long was the car fire or anything like that. You can tell if they died before the car fire, interesting fact though, if there's searing of the lungs. This is at autopsy. If there's searing of the lungs, they breathed in the flames. If there's no searing, then they weren't breathing when they died.
Oh, interesting.
So they may have passed away from a heart attack, car caught on fire because it crashed and burned. So you can tell if they were alive or not when they hit the thing. So that's one way of incorporating that.